It's morning in Tokyo. The city awakes, thinking it's just going to be another day, like it was yesterday and the day before that. The children go to school, the parents to work. What they don't know is that in the next few hours their lives could be immeasurably impacted. Behind the scenes is taking place the inner workings of what could be the biggest disaster in human history. By the end of the day, there can only be one of two options. Either they remain living like they were before, unaware of the drama that just occurred behind their backs. Or the worst case scenario. The words nobody ever thought could be honestly spoken would be announced to the citizens of the largest city on Earth. Abandon Tokyo. This is the story of how it almost happened. On March 11th, 2011, a magnitude 9.1 earthquake strikes off the coast of northern Japan, 231 miles northeast of Tokyo. The effects of the quake rock buildings, knock books off their shelves, and, in some cases, people off their feet. The quake lasts for approximately 5 long minutes. When it's over, people file out of their buildings and onto the streets. There will not be any more work done today. Damage in Tokyo proper is light. Strict Japanese building codes meant that the large skyscrapers are designed to sway with the shaking ground. Even still, Tokyo's transportation network is crippled. The expressway snaking through the city is closed. All rail lines are shut down. Tokyo's 2 international airports cancel all flights and direct incoming planes to United States military bases in the region. As masses of people crowd the sidewalks and occasional aftershocks roll in, a different kind of news starts to filter through the crowd. A tsunami has hit northern Japan. As entire towns are wiped off the map, another situation is developing at a nuclear power plant in Fukushima Prefecture. The Fukushima Daiichi power plant is one of the 15 largest nuclear power stations in the world. Construction on the plant began in 1967, and its 4 reactors were activated throughout the 1970s. Originally, the facility was supposed to be located upon a natural rise in the terrain, sitting at 35 meters above sea level. But due to threat of earthquakes, the rise was reduced to 10 meters above sea level so that the nuclear reactors could be constructed on solid bedrock. As the first tsunami waves rolled in, they were recorded at a height of 14 meters. The facility's seawall didn't stand a chance. Water began to flood the plant, knocking offline the emergency diesel generators powering the cooling systems of the reactors and spent fuel rods. A constant flow of water is required to keep the reactors cool. Without power, there is no sustained way to pump fresh water through the system, and temperatures of the water inside the reactors was reaching boiling point. The possibility of nuclear meltdown was increasing by the minute. Inside the control room, employees worked in complete darkness as the tsunami tore through the plant. The main backup generators were offline, that much was certain. But what about the secondary emergency water pumps inside the reactor buildings? Risking exposure to the effects of the tsunami and possible radioactive leakage, plant workers confirmed that the emergency pumps within the reactor buildings were still operational. But this did not put the plant out of danger. It merely bought it time. At 3:32 p.m., the plant's operators, the Tokyo Electric Power Company, or TEPCO, informed the Japanese government that they were facing a quote Article 10 situation. A first-level nuclear emergency was declared. Back in Tokyo, the sun was setting. Train lines were still unoperational, and thousands of people who relied on them now began their long walks home. Some would travel over 10 hours just to get back. With Fukushima and several other plants around Japan unoperational as a result of the earthquake and tsunami, power shortages started to affect the greater Tokyo area. Tsunami warnings were also still in effect for the Tokyo Bay area. Many employees whose offices were near the water would be forced to sleep in their buildings before the authorities gave them the all-clear to leave early next morning. During the night, the backup water pump in Fukushima Reactor 1 failed. The water inside the reactor was quickly evaporating due to the heat from the active nuclear fuel rods. The reactor's core began to melt down, mixing with other elements inside the reactor to form a heavily radioactive magma-like substance called corium, which then pierced the reactor vessel. Due to this evaporation, the reactor's containment vessel was entering into an overpressure situation. If something was not done soon, the reactor itself may explode, causing a disaster of unparalleled proportions. Early on the morning of the 12th, Japan's Prime Minister Naoto Kan traveled to Fukushima. The debate between TEPCO and the government was over the decision to vent pressure in the reactor or not. If the gases were vented, they would be releasing extremely radioactive materials into the environment. However, this was deemed necessary in order to ensure the nuclear containment vessel was not breached. The decision was made to vent. And what happened next turned this seemingly localized disaster into an international crisis. As the gas was released, small cracks within the pipe leading outside meant that elements of pure hydrogen within the gas was leaked into the hollow area above the reactor vessel. Pure hydrogen reacts violently when exposed to oxygen, and at the critical moment, disaster. The explosion was heard from nearby towns, and it was at this moment its inhabitants knew their lives had just been changed forever. The major question that needed to be answered following the explosion was, did the impact of the blast rupture the main reactor vessel? Thankfully, the force of the explosion only blew apart the steel frame structure above the reactor vessel. The vessel itself was still secure. With the threat of more pump failures and corresponding meltdowns of other reactors looming, TEPCO held a press conference announcing the details of the situation to the public. While TEPCO never used the word meltdown in their conference, the seriousness of the situation was understood by the population of Tokyo. In a city known for its new gadgets and advanced technologies for sale, the hottest commodity in Tokyo became bottled water. While the majority of native Tokyoites decided to remain in the city, the large majority of the expat community in the city decided to leave, heading for hotels in West Japan or back across the ocean to their native countries. The tension in the city was palpable, the population not knowing if their lives would be in immediate danger. But for now, they waited. In Fukushima, over the next few days, 2 more reactors would melt down, and 2 more hydrogen explosions occurred. This was the apex of the crisis. As explained by the Prime Minister at the time, quote, "From the 16th to the 20th, we were able to halt the spread of radiation, but by a paper-thin margin. If the fuel rods had burned through in all 6 reactors, that would have definitely affected Tokyo. From a very early stage, I had a high concern for Tokyo. I was forming ideas for a Tokyo evacuation plan in my head. In the 1923 earthquake, the government ordered martial law. I thought about the possibility of having to set up such emergency law if it really came down to it." Close quote. When pressured for a decision on the size of the exclusion zone, the conditions for the worst-case scenario, a 250-kilometer exclusion zone around the plant and an evacuation of Tokyo, was deemed not necessary. In its stead, a base exclusion zone of 20 kilometers was established, later extending some kilometers to the north and displacing over 400,000 people, most of whom would never get to return to their homes. Their cities and towns left abandoned. Tokyo, the largest city on Earth, was barely able to avert the same fate. Quoting the Prime Minister again, "We were only able to avert a 250-kilometer evacuation zone by a paper-thin margin, thanks to the efforts of the people who risked their lives. Next time, we might not be so lucky." The cleanup at Fukushima is still ongoing. The effects of radioactive material released into the soil and water is still being studied. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel for more great content to come. I've set up a Patreon page for those of you who wish to support the video creation process. I appreciate it, and as Patreon supporters, you'll be able to see the next video in the series right now before it's released to YouTube. It's a good one, so if it's within your means, consider supporting and check it out. Thank you for watching here on Shock and Awesome.